I went to Brazil some years ago and I started learning Portuguese there. The hardest time was probably the first 3 or 4 months because I was learning from scratch. I didn't know any Portuguese before. When I went out with other people, everyone was speaking Portuguese, so I couldn't join in the conversation, which I found really difficult because I like meeting people, I like talking to people. So I found that whole period really frustrating. Then after a while I started to pick up a few phrases. I started to understand a little bit more. Every day I studied with a grammar book, and then I went out and I spoke to people. I was very motivated, obviously, because I was living there. Everywhere I went I had a little dictionary, so I took that with me. So if I was trying to say something to someone, I used to flick through the dictionary to find the word I wanted. This is not a great way to have a conversation. So it made talking to people very slow and very difficult. Also, I started noting down useful phrases in a notebook, and I kept the notebook in my back pocket. Every time I learnt a new word, I wrote it down in the book, and then when I had a few spare minutes, I took out the book and tried to learn these new words and phrases. So I found that pretty useful. I found that I was able to build up my vocabulary quite quickly this way. I think the hardest thing in the first few months was trying to keep up with the conversation, because all the local people seem to speak so quickly. They speak at their normal speed and they don't slow down for you. So that was very difficult. I think the best thing living in another country when you're learning the language is you're surrounded by the language. So you pick up a lot of words and phrases just by listening to people, listening to the radio, watching TV. So I found that helped me a lot as well. After about 3 or 4 months, I could get by fairly well. I could talk to people in shops, I could talk to taxi drivers, I could have basic conversations. After 6 months or more, I found I could get my message across much better. So it's frustrating at first, but if you stick with it, it's really rewarding in the end. Okay, let's look at some of the words and phrases from this lesson. Firstly, I was learning from scratch. This means I was learning from zero. I was learning from the beginning. I had never studied this before. I was learning from scratch. Pick up a few phrases. To pick up a few phrases, or to pick up words, or to pick up a language, it means to learn something by accident. So you can pick up a language just by living in the country, being surrounded by people speaking that language. So pick up a language or pick up a few phrases. Flick through the dictionary. This means to look through the dictionary very quickly. A spare few minutes. This means I had a few minutes free, a few extra minutes, a spare few minutes. To build up my vocabulary. This means to add words to your vocabulary, to learn extra words, to build up your vocabulary. To keep up with the conversation. This means to try to follow a conversation at the same speed. So if you're learning a new language, the local people seem to speak very quickly. So you try to follow what they're saying at the speed they're talking. This is not easy, but you try to keep up with a conversation so you don't get lost and you don't get left behind. Slow down. This means to reduce speed. So when someone's speaking a language you are learning, you want them to slow down. You want them to speak slower. I could get by fairly well. Get by means to manage or to survive. You could use this to talk about language. You could say, I have enough English to get by. I have enough English to do the basic things I need. You could also use this to talk about money. You could say, I have enough money to get by. I have enough money to pay for the basic things I need. Somewhere to live, something to eat. I could get my message across. This means to communicate, to make people understand what you want to say. So if you're learning a language, it can be difficult if your language level is low, to get your message across, to get people to understand what you are trying to say.